Quite a bit of what I had proposed to speak on has been anticipated by Mr. Arun Shore and Mr. Sitaram Yechury. My mind goes back nostalgically to early or mid-1994. I do not remember the exact date. To my very first legal column in the Tribune, which was about the only paper brought out from Chandigarh during those days. I chose to write on the case Yechury Saab secured a pardon for the police officers concerned, and Shore Saab referred to in passing the Tiljala case from West Bengal. That very evening, I received a phone call from KPS Gill, inviting me over to his camp office cum residence in the Geo Mess in Sector 2 in Chandigarh. It was the beginning of a long and unbroken association with KPS Gill that continued till his death last month. Tiljala, ladies and gentlemen, represented one of the high watermarks of anti-terrorist action by the Punjab police, led by KPS Gill, and was a kind of security operation conducted in May 1993 that came to be conducted decades later in May 2011 by the United States under President Barack Obama to take out, as the Americans say, Osama bin Laden. For Abbottabad, in the Hazara region of northeastern Pakistan, substitute Tiljala on the outskirts of Calcutta in West Bengal. With due apologies to Yechury Saab, then a soft haven for terrorists from Punjab. A PIL was filed. The Supreme Court, headed by the Chief Justice of India, cracked down. A CBI investigation ordered. And true to form, the CBI charge-sheeted the concerned officers for murder and destruction of evidence, 302, read with 201 IPC. Completely overlooking the fact that the terrorist killed, or I should say allegedly killed, was a former Punjab police constable who had switched allegiance to the Babbar Khalsa, had over 24 heinous FIRs registered against him by name. Much of what happened in Punjab during those grim days was never recorded. But here was a case of almost 24 FIRs recorded by name and had killed about 15 persons, including 8 to 10 police officers, before Nemesis finally overtook him at Tiljala. The entire world applauded President Obama in 2011. But way back in 2001, the Punjab police officers involved in the Tiljala operation were convicted for murder by a sessions court in West Bengal. With Mr. Gill's old friend, Harkishan Singh Surjit, with Sitaram Yechury and his comrades in tow, coming to the rescue later, securing a pardon from the head of state. My article in the Tribune, which KPS Gill was responding to, defended the Punjab police and their legal and constitutional right to hit back in Tiljala and kill the terrorist. A position which I have maintained as a lawyer ever since, both out of court and in court. The Supreme Court's 2011 judgment in the Salva Judham case, Nandini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh, exemplifies the court's inanely profound understanding of terrorism, first displayed in the Tiljala case 2 decades earlier. An understanding marked by an empty and vain rhetorical affirmation of the constitutional values of personal liberty and freedom from arbitrary action, an exaggerated distrust of police conduct and behavior nurtured by centuries of legal tradition inherited from the British common law, and an extraordinary obtuseness, if not a complete color blindness, to the distinction between police harshness or excesses and the inhumanities, the unspeakable brutalities of terrorism. The Punjab police under KPS Gill fought and defeated terrorism in the raw, without any legal help from India's Dacian rule of law apparatus. The word Dacian comes from the 19th century English law scholar who coined the word rule of law, Professor A.V. Dicey. Without any help from the rule of law apparatus in India, or the great inspirational principles of due process jurisprudence modeled on the American Constitution, and now forming part of Article 21 as reinterpreted by the Supreme Court in Maneka Gandhi's case in 1978. The Punjab police under KPS Gill fought and defeated terrorism in the raw, decades before 9/11 transformed and transfigured the global consciousness and the international political and legal debate on terrorism. We in Punjab, Hindus and Sikhs, ministers, bureaucrats and judges, laymen and lawyers alike, owe our lives to KPS Gill. Just as the Akalis yesterday, no less than the Congress today, owe their governments and their political power to the peace wrested by KPS Gill literally from the jaws of death and secured for posterity. The Punjab police under KPS Gill fought and defeated terrorism pre-9/11 and pre-26/11 at a time when, in the words of KPS Gill himself, quote, the writ of the Supreme Court ran from Delhi to Palam, unquote. Or what he precisely meant, ran only from Delhi to Palam and not beyond or elsewhere. Shori Saab has referred to it extensively before, read out his impassioned press statement. And angry, a furiously angry and anguished KPS Gill, after that press statement, in an open letter to the then Prime Minister I.K. Gujral, who once headed the so-called Punjab group here in the nation's capital. In an open letter by KPS Gill to I.K. Gujral, carried by the Tribune on its front page, days after Ajit Singh Sandhu, the former SSP of Taran committed suicide by flinging himself before a running train, the Himalayan Queen, coming from Delhi to Kalka via Chandigarh in 1997. Ajit Singh Sandhu, Gill told the Prime Minister, and Shori Saab has read his press statement earlier to the same effect, volunteered to go to Taran a border district once infested by smugglers and now by terrorists, at a time when other police officers hastily took medical leave when offered a posting in Tarantaran. At a time when, in KPS Gill's supreme and unsurpassable irony, the writ of the Supreme Court ran from Delhi to Palam, or only from Delhi to Palam. Driven to despair by a spate of departmental inquiries and human rights court cases, and physically assaulted in Amritsar Central Jail by a notorious terrorist Nishan Singh, half his size, with no action or even words of sympathy from the government, state or central, Sandhu ended his own life. I was the first to meet Ajit Singh Sandhu immediately on his release from Amritsar Central Jail at the residence of another doughty fighter against terrorism, the former DGP Punjab, Sumit Singh Saini, after Sandhu was released from Amritsar jail, just about a fortnight before he committed suicide. He did speak about the ingratitude of the police department. Gupta Sahab, he said, his exact words, पिछले 2 महीनों से, though he was in jail, हर एक दिन एतवार को छोड़ के, one calendar month followed by another, for 2 full calendar months, एक दिन ऐसा नहीं निकला जब मैंने कोई डिपार्टमेंटल इंक्वायरी ना भुगती हो या कोई कोर्ट केस ना भुगता हो। मगर मुझे सीबीआई की प्रोसिक्यूशंस का मुझे कोई ग्रीवेंस नहीं है, वो तो मेरे खिलाफ थी। मुझे कोर्ट केसेस की कोई ग्रीवेंस नहीं है, मैं भुगत लूंगा। जो पंजाब पुलिस ने, बिकॉज द रिजीम हैड चेंज, मिस्टर गिल हैड रिटायर्ड इन 95, जो पंजाब पुलिस ने मेरे डिपार्टमेंट में मेरे साथ किया, he was hit and shaken by that ingratitude. He threw himself before the Himalayan queen about a fortnight later, though he had not betrayed that evening any sign that he would cave in. You very rightly said, sir, that KPS Gill remained till the very end a proud Jat Sikh. And as such, he did not approve of suicide. But he rose angrily and emotionally to Sandhu's defense, holding up the mirror to the judiciary and calling the Prime Minister himself to account. Neither age nor retirement had diminished his ardor. In service or out of it, he stood by his men. In service or out of it, he led from the front. No other police force in the world has battled and vanquished terrorism in more difficult and unprotected circumstances. Unsupported by the people who were too fear-stricken to speak up. Unprotected by the state, which remained too timid and law-abiding till the very end to officially own responsibility. The Civil Secretariat in Chandigarh, 10 stories tall, and along with the High Court, an emblem of Le Corbusier's famed Capitol complex that draws hordes of admiring tourists and students of architecture from all over the world. The Civil Secretariat stood only in name and all but collapsed within, ravaged by terrorism and terrorist directives and the fear of terrorist vengeance. The steel in Macaulay's steel frame in the Punjab had suffered a complete meltdown. Unsupported by the people, unprotected by the state, and abandoned by the judiciary, which turned the blindfolds of the legendary maiden of justice into a convenient, self-serving shield for its own lack of realism and want of courage. If the writ of the Supreme Court ran only from Delhi to Palam, the writ of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, where I have practiced since 1980, and now I am a senior advocate, did not run at all. No PIL was ever entertained by the High Court. A PIL sparked off the CBI investigation and prosecution at Tiljala. But no PIL was ever entertained by the High Court against the terrorists. No suo motu action ever initiated by any bench, single bench, division bench, or full bench, on the question of combating terrorism and the peril that it posed for the rule of law. Last year's Jat reservation agitation in Haryana and the collapse of the state in Haryana triggered off a suo motu intervention by the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which appointed me amicus curiae to assist it. The case is still going on. But decades earlier, ravaged by terrorism, fear-stricken no less than the general populace, the Punjab and Haryana High Court remained dormant, inactive, quiescent, if not complicit in its own little shell. Not a single mandamus ever issued by the High Court directing any terrorist to be detained or interrogated or tried, or any coercive action to be taken against any terrorist group or organization. Below the High Court, the subordinate judiciary, judicial magistrates in Punjab conducting remand proceedings under Section 167 of the Code of Criminal Procedure were too scared to refuse bail to terrorists. Mr. Gill's predecessor, Julian Ribeiro and not KPS Gill, had earlier transgressed upon the constitutional principle of separation of powers by getting the state government to amend Section 167 CRPC to empower executive magistrates instead of judicial magistrates to act under Section 167. But that was struck down by the High Court, and rightly so in my humble opinion. Magistrates were too scared to refuse bail. Public prosecutors were too scared to prosecute terrorists. And session judges and additional session judges appointed to man special courts or designated courts under special laws like TADA or the Special Courts Act were too scared to try terrorists, or to speak of convicting them. I personally know a sessions judge who went into a state of depression on receiving his warrant of appointment as a special or designated judge for terrorist cases. To be appointed to a special or designated court was to invite death, or at the least, the paralyzing fear of death. The oft-repeated argument that not a single terrorist was ever convicted in Punjab is factually correct. The real reason, however, is not that the terrorists concerned were innocent, but that no judge or judicial officer in Punjab was willing to take the physical risk of convicting any of them. Unsupported by the people, unprotected by the state, and abandoned by the judiciary, no other police force in the world has battled and vanquished terrorism in more difficult and more unequal circumstances than the Punjab police. and no other police officer in the world, I dare say, has borne with greater courage, competence, and responsibility the burden of leading such a battle against terrorism than KPS Gill. But even that, for all its richness, is not the true measure of my tribute to KPS Gill today, or the complete measure of it. During my stint as counsel for the Libraham Commission of Inquiry from 1999 to 2005, probing the demolition of the Babri Masjid at Ayodhya, and cross-examining on behalf of the Commission L.K. Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Uma Bharti, P.V. Narasimha Rao, V.P. Singh, Kalyan Singh, and a host of top-ranking civil and police officers associated with the fateful events in Ayodhya, I became absolutely convinced of the unqualified imperative of India's commitment to secularism, of the absolute necessity of India being and remaining secular at all costs and in all circumstances if the country has to remain one and united. Being and remaining secular in relation to other religious communities is not half as difficult as being and remaining secular, absolutely and unwaveringly secular in relation to the communalism of one's own community. Hindus in relation to Hindu communalism, Sikhs in relation to Sikh communalism, Muslims in relation to Muslim communalism. It is here that KPS Gill, a proud Jat Sikh, leading the battle against Sikh terrorism, marks and exemplifies an achievement beyond comparison. Both Punjab and the nation as a whole were singularly fortunate to have in their midst and at the professional helm in those years an officer like KPS Gill, waging an implacable war against the communalism of his own community and waging it to successful completion. KPS Gill's finest hour, to use the Churchillian phrase, the hour of his triumph over terrorism in Punjab, was also, by definition, the finest hour of Indian secularism. And that is the complete measure of my tribute to him today. Thank you.